When it comes to dinosaur diets, they run the gamut. From the herbivores who crunched, sliced, diced, raked, and chewed land plants, to the carnivores who were all about the bite. Our topic for this lesson, we're going to explore the menu for dinosaurs and their specialized feeding strategies from the business end up front to the tail end of the digestive process. And don't forget, as integral components of their ecosystems, dinosaurs sometimes served as food for others. Right now, it's all about the eaters and the eaten. First up, what food was out there for dinosaurs to eat? For the carnivorous theropods, you might think the answer is simple. Other dinosaurs, and pretty much any other animal that crossed their paths. But though most theropods were ferocious carnivores, a handful of them actually lost their sharp teeth in favor of a different food source. For instance, Oviraptor, a Maniraptoran theropod closely related to birds, lost its teeth in favor of a powerful beak it may have used for crushing hard nuts, seeds, eggs, and possibly even shellfish or insects. And Spinosaurus, another theropod as large as Tyrannosaurus rex, is hypothesized to have trolled ancient nearshore environments in search of fish. The conical, relatively simple, sharp teeth are one clue to this creature's fishy diet. For herbivorous dinosaurs, there were a lot more options as plant diversity increased over time. I like to think of plant evolution transpiring in three big waves. The first wave resulted in the diversification of seedless, vascular plants, like ferns, that reproduce using spores. At the beginning of the age of dinosaurs, about 230 million years ago, the vascular plants were already common on land. Unlike mosses, these plants could escape the confines of ground hugging in favor of big bodies. There was a diverse array of ferns, with some as big as trees. There were also unusual trees called lycopods and sphenopsids, like the water-loving plant genus Equisetum, more commonly known as horsetails. The second wave of plants to evolve was also far more ancient than the origin of dinosaurs. These were the gymnosperms, the first seed-bearing plants. They include evergreens, cypress, cycads, and ginkgos. They're much taller and woodier than the first wave plants, and their unique innovation of seeds meant that they spread rapidly during the late Triassic when those first wave ferns and others were on the decline. The gymnosperms dominated dinosaur ecosystems until the Cretaceous, when the third wave of plants, known as angiosperms, evolved. By the early Cretaceous period, they had developed a variety of strategies to attract herbivores and pollinators, things like bright, tasty flowers and fruit, along with tough seeds that could withstand animal digestive tracts. There has been some evidence of herbivorous dinosaurs and plants co-evolving, particularly in Cretaceous ecosystems. One study compiled a database of Cretaceous dinosaur and plant distributions to begin to test out coevolutionary interactions over time. They looked into a variety of different dinosaur groups, including sauropods, stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, ornithopods, ceratopsians, pachycephalosaurs, and herbivorous theropods, as well as major groups of plants, including ginkgos, angiosperms, cycads, conifers, and others. For the most part, there was no positive correlation between diversity patterns in major groups of herbivorous dinosaurs and flowering plants. That said, one group, the dome-headed pachycephalosaurs, did exhibit a positive correlation with angiosperms, perhaps hinting at coordinated evolutionary history between the two groups. In contrast, stegosaurs showed a significant negative correlation with flowering plants and a significant positive correlation with non-flowering cycads. This is super interesting because both stegosaurs and cycads appear to decline in concert during the early Cretaceous period. At least in the case of stegosaurs, it marked the beginning of the end of their evolutionary story. Wait a minute, you might be thinking. So far, I've told you about a ferny understory with a landscape dominated by gymnosperms and then angiosperms. But didn't dinosaurs eat grass? You may have noticed that most paleoartistic reconstructions of dinosaur worlds leave grass out of the picture. For a long time, we had no fossil record of grass that extended back into the age of dinosaurs. But it turns out that diverse grasses were present. They just weren't very widespread. At least for the late surviving dinosaurs in the southern hemisphere, grass may also have been an enticing food source. Now that we know what food sources were out there for dinosaurs, what data are there about dinosaur diets? Our best evidence comes from several key sources, along with a few case studies that help paint a picture of feeding strategies as diverse as dinosaurs themselves. Let's start with the business end of dinosaur feeding, the teeth. One of the best things about dinosaurs, unlike mammals that only have 2 sets of teeth, dinosaurs replace their teeth throughout their lives via a conveyor belt-like system below the gums. As soon as a tooth was lost or wore down, a new one was right there, ready to fill in the gap and keep those feeding machines functional. This means that the fossil record of shed dinosaur teeth is rich. Since teeth were always being lost, and they were particularly tough skeletal elements, they had a pretty good chance of being fossilized. But what can isolated teeth tell us about dinosaur diets? A lot, actually. The shape of teeth is often the first clue to diet and to taxonomic identity. Just think back to the first finds of dinosaur fossils. Megalosaurus and Iguanodon included different types of teeth, one with teeth for chomping and slicing meat, and the other with a tooth ready to process plants. It turns out that there is a great deal of variation in the shapes of teeth, even in animals that ate the same kinds of stuff. Consider a few sauropod groups, for example. Camarasaurus and Brachiosaurus are 2 closely related sauropods that share spoon-shaped teeth. Diplodocus and Apatosaurus are 2 other closely related sauropods that share pencil-shaped teeth. These simple differences in teeth point to different feeding strategies among these contemporary sauropods. Unlike Camarasaur-style teeth, which were specialized for biting leaves off branches, diplodocid teeth were built for stripping leaves. One of the most interesting ways to explore the relationship between dinosaur diets and dentition is called microwear analysis. We use scanning electron microscopes to zoom in on the tiniest details of teeth and begin to resolve microscopic scratches, grooves, and pits that can be linked to different types of vegetation. A diet of mostly soft ferns and fruits, for example, wouldn't leave deep scratches in the enamel of teeth, but a diet that included leaves with an occasional stiff branch mixed in would. A diet rich in grass would also include lots of scratches, since grass contains tough, glass-like silica. The relatively delicate teeth of many herbivorous dinosaurs indicates that most didn't spend much time processing their food in the mouth by chewing. Instead, they may have relied on other digestive processes, like fermentation in the gut, to break down the tough vegetation in their diets. Several scientists have suggested that some dinosaurs may have needed to grind up their veggies in a gizzard, a specialized pouch in the digestive system that lies between the esophagus and stomach. In a few living archosaurs, gizzards hold small stones known as gastroliths, or gizzard stones, that help with the mechanical breakdown of plant material and are especially useful when in-mouth processing doesn't occur. Though sauropods are commonly assumed to have used gastroliths to aid in digestion, the fossil evidence in support of this hypothesis is scant at best. Polished gastroliths have been found in association with a couple of species of small, primitive ceratopsians from Mongolia and may have assisted in pulverizing tough plant material in their diets. When it comes to the theropods, their teeth are wildly variable, particularly with respect to shape, compression, bluntness, and serration patterns. Each of these factors imparts different functional limitations to the ways that teeth interact with potential prey. Some theropod teeth were more useful for slicing, as in Deinonychus. The blunter teeth of Tyrannosaurus, on the other hand, seem to have been capable of crunching through bone. In fact, in the case of Tyrannosaurus, we have recovered teeth embedded within the frills of Triceratops, which points to the bone-puncturing power of those lethal banana-shaped teeth. Once we go beyond teeth to the fossils of jaws and skulls, things get even more interesting. Ankylosaurs, stegosaurs, and pachycephalosaurs all share relatively delicate, mitten-shaped teeth that weren't great for in-mouth processing. For all three of these dinosaur groups, they also exhibit a sharp front edge of their jaws that would have been covered by a keratinous beak called a rhamphotheca. Their beaks impart a degree of selectivity in their herbivorous diet. These dinosaurs would nip vegetation with their beaks, pulp their food slightly in the mouth, and then rely on the rest of their digestive systems to really break down those energy resources. Another innovation that can't be missed occurs in different ways across three distinctive groups of herbivorous dinosaurs: ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, and one group of sauropods, all evolved specializations known as dental batteries. A dental battery occurs when all the teeth in each jaw are tightly packed together so that the tops of the teeth form a continuous flat surface. In ceratopsians, these dental batteries acted like a giant pair of scissors, shearing food to bits whenever the dinosaur closed its jaws. In hadrosaurs, the dental battery took on the role of grinding the food to a pulp, almost acting like molars in mammals. Both ceratopsians and hadrosaurs combined these dental batteries with toothless beaks up front, perfect for selecting just the right bite. The sauropod dinosaur Nigersaurus independently evolved its own unique version of a dental battery. Instead of focusing on the cheek teeth, more than 500 teeny tiny peg-shaped teeth were aligned in a straight row right at the front of a squared-off muzzle. This unusual arrangement indicates that Nigersaurus was grazing near the ground, almost like a Cretaceous lawnmower. When we consider the faces of dinosaurs, especially any species that did have even minimal in-mouth processing of their food, one question that comes up is whether or not these animals had cheeks. Imagine how hard it would be to keep food in our mammal mouths while we chewed if we didn't have cheeks to hold it in. Lots of scientists have assumed that ceratopsians had fleshy cheeks because they were making comparisons to modern-day, large-bodied mammalian herbivores. As in ceratopsians, the teeth on both the upper and lower jaws of these animals are inset toward the tongue, leaving slight excavations on the edges of the jawbones that need to be explained. Traditionally, the explanation has been that ceratopsians must have had muscular cheeks like mammals. But Larry Whitmer, the person who has pioneered the rigorous application of the extant phylogenetic bracket to tons of questions about dinosaur soft parts, noted some key anatomical differences in mammals and dinosaurs. Using the EPB, Larry has argued that crocodiles or eagles might be better analogs. Instead of muscular cheeks, he maintained that these areas of dinosaur mouths supported an extension of the keratinous covering of the beak. There's no evidence for cheeks so far in any dinosaur. All it took to toss that old idea out was a detailed look at the anatomy of their living modern analogs in the extant phylogenetic bracket. Clarity comes in the details. Details pave the way for the fall of another popular dinosaur myth, that of pack hunting, especially in small-bodied Manoraptoran theropods like Deinonychus and Velociraptor. This myth has infiltrated pop culture through terrifying scenes in films like Jurassic Park. But the reality is that the evidence for pack hunting in these dinosaurs is actually pretty sparse. The most famous support for pack hunting comes from early Cretaceous sites in Montana, where the skeleton of a plant-eating dinosaur called Tenontosaurus was found with a whole lot of Deinonychus teeth. The original research suggested that this was evidence of social groups in the form of pack hunting. The problem is that there were lots of other bones mixed alongside all these teeth. The site wasn't simply a dead Tenontosaurus and a bunch of Deinonychus teeth. It was a bone bed that included an assemblage of an early Cretaceous community. All these other bits of data were left out, making an intense death scene take shape, with a pack of Deinonychus feeding and losing their teeth as they did. More recent work on fossils from this locality included detailed taphonomic work, which revealed another plausible story. The Deinonychus who shed their teeth may have done so in feeding on the dead Tyrannosaurus, or the teeth may have accumulated over time alongside the bones of turtles, fish, crocodiles, and other reptiles. Those Deinonychus may never have seen the Tyrannosaurus when it was dead or alive. One of the most spectacular fossils ever found, nicknamed the fighting dinosaurs, comes from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia and lends credence to the idea that at least some small theropods were likely solitary hunters. The fossil preserves a single velociraptor locked in a battle to the death with a small Protoceratops. The velociraptor has its sickle-shaped claw poised at the abdomen, ready to slice. The Protoceratops is biting the velociraptor's arm. They were preserved, fighting it out alone when a sand dune collapsed and buried them alive. Though pack hunting is unlikely for these small raptors, for large tyrannosaurs, it is becoming increasingly clear that they spent time together, at least sometimes. A few field localities in Canada have yielded Cretaceous bone beds of Albertosaurus, a close relative of T-Rex, showing that these animals had all died together at the same time. The group includes young animals that are less than half adult size, all the way up to larger adults. Similar sites have been uncovered in Mongolia and the United States, suggesting that these big guys may have been more social than other smaller theropods. This contention gets additional support from the signatures of partially healed bite marks that reveal a pattern of nasty interactions among tyrannosaurs. These animals are frequently found with gouges and punctures along the snout, the undersides of the jaws, and occasionally on the top or back of the skull. It may be the case that tyrannosaurs interacted with each other using their teeth to communicate and compete, and then may have put their differences aside to feed together. Another way of peering into the world of theropod diets is through experimental analysis of their bites. You might remember our discussion of finite element analysis, or FEA, from our lesson on dissecting a T-Rex. This sophisticated engineering tool has allowed paleontologist Emily Rayfield to investigate the distribution of stress throughout the skull of some theropods when biting. For instance, she determined that Allosaurus was specialized for rapid chopping bites rather than a strong, forceful biting, using its bite more like a sharp hatchet than puncturing and pulling like Tyrannosaurus. Using FEA, Emily was also able to estimate that the bite force of T-Rex was 3 to 4 times stronger than the bite force of Allosaurus. This would be similar to the bite force differences between alligators and lions. Differences in the teeth of these two carnivores also point to variations in feeding behavior. Allosaurus has blade-like teeth with serrations on the front and back edges that would have ripped through flesh with ease. Even scarier for their prey, the serrations twisted around the teeth to make slicing even more efficient. This is in contrast to the blunter, fatter, banana-shaped teeth of Tyrannosaurus, whose forceful bite would have deeply punctured first and then pulled through the penetrated flesh using the energy from its powerful neck muscles. T-Rex was a bone biter, wearing down its teeth rapidly with repeated impacts. Evidence for dinosaur diets also comes from the tail end of their digestive process, unique traces of fossilized feces. We call these fossil lumps of poop coprolites, derived from the Greek words for dung and stone. You can imagine that dinosaurs, big and small, must have left plenty of poop around Mesozoic landscapes. But given its soft, squishy nature, it certainly wasn't easy to fossilize, especially with the important role that dinosaur poop played in the ecosystem. It was no doubt an abundant source of nutrition for insects, plants, and bacteria. It turns out that dinosaur droppings have become quite important when studying dinosaur diets. My friend Karen Chin is the world's foremost dinosaur poopologist. She's spent her career getting the scoop on dino poop. Karen and her team found the biggest dinosaur coprolite known at about 17 inches long and with a volume of more than 2 liters. Karen used a microscope to peer inside and was quickly able to rule out herbivorous dinosaurs as the source. Since this giant coprolite preserved the remains of juvenile duck-billed dinosaur bones, it was a tasty one-bite snack for a giant theropod. Other coprolites have yielded important insights into the diets of herbivorous dinosaurs. A hadrosaur coprolite preserved evidence of little bits of shelled invertebrates. Crustaceans preserved amidst fragments of rotting wood, fungal hyphae, and the burrows of ancient dung beetles. A sauropod coprolite recovered in the late Cretaceous of India preserved the unique silica-rich phytoliths, special cells that help build grasses. This coprolite not only pushed the fossil evidence for the first grass back in time by millions of years, but it also revealed that the titanosaur who pooped it out had been busy eating from nearly every part of the ecosystem: treetops, shrubs, and grasses at foot level. This helped revise the idea that the long necks of sauropods were all about stretching tall. They were just as useful for expanding the feeding envelope. Before we close this lesson, we have to flip the story. It's pretty tough to imagine a dinosaur being eaten by anything but a bigger, hungrier dinosaur. But dinosaurs have also found themselves at the opposite end of the food chain, becoming prey or host to other kinds of creatures in their world. Sometimes the tiniest of creatures were able to bring these behemoths to their knees. Sometimes the eaters became the eaten. The early Cretaceous mammal Raphenomammus was pretty big for a Mesozoic hairball. It weighed in at about 25 pounds. Though shrimpy in comparison to adult dinosaurs, their young had to watch out. One specimen of Raphenomammus was found preserved with the remains of a juvenile ceratopsian named Psittacosaurus in its gut cavity. It seems that Raphenomammus knew exactly what delectable dinosaur tasted like. Or how about another late Cretaceous reptile? Let's meet Sonajay, an egg-eating Indian snake. At about 10 feet long and only about as thick as your arm, Sonajay may not seem like a serious threat to dinosaurs, but it was discovered coiled within a nest of titanosaur eggs. Its skeleton was wrapped around eggs in the nest, a baby titanosaur alongside, about to become a hapless victim. Dinosaurs were also hosts to parasites, which might have created the same itchy bumps and scabs that today's animals experience when exposed to tiny but ferocious critters like fleas, ticks, and lice. Blood-feeding ectoparasites would have had a smorgasbord to choose from, so long as they were tough enough to break through dinosaur skin. But evidence suggests that they could. Fleas were long thought to have evolved alongside us mammals and modern birds with our delicious warm blood and hairy and feathery bodies. But new discoveries in China from Jurassic and Cretaceous rocks have turned that idea on its head. Fleas back then were more than double the size of their modern counterparts, sometimes up to 20 millimeters long. They lacked the leg specializations of today's jumping fleas, but they had siphoning mouthparts that were like armored, saw-like projections. With these mouthparts, it's clear that these fleas had to have been feeding on something with a hide much tougher than that of early mammals or birds. In addition, the mammals at the time were mostly quite small, so these fleas would have sucked them dry. These giant Jurassic fleas likely sliced through tough dinosaur skin in search of a blood meal. As for ticks, 99-million-year-old Cretaceous amber fossils discovered in Myanmar preserve ticks hanging onto a dinosaur feather, indicating that they were as tenacious then as they are now. Another chunk of amber from Myanmar also yielded fluffy dinosaur feathers. A closer look revealed a bunch of lice. They're tiny, only about 2.5 times as wide as a human hair, and with mouthparts made for chewing, like modern lice. One of the preserved feathers was damaged by chewing, similar to what occurs in modern birds infested with lice. Of course, dinosaurs also carried diseases and endoparasites, and they may have even picked up some of these problems through the bites of fleas, ticks, and lice. Sometimes being the eaten means being consumed from the inside out by microscopic parasites swimming through the bloodstream. Another dinosaur coprolite preserves traces of a protozoan, as well as 3 different types of parasitic worms. These ancient microorganisms resemble endoparasites that commonly infest modern animals. The protozoan cysts were most similar to a type of modern amoeba, and the evidence of wormy parasites included the eggs of both trematodes or flukes, as well as nematodes or roundworms. Modern-day trematode infections include things like schistosomiasis, which can result in all kinds of terrible symptoms, from intense abdominal pain to paralysis. Trematodes typically have a two-host life cycle: a vertebrate primary host, like a dinosaur, where reproduction occurs, and then an intermediate host, usually an aquatic snail. Nematodes, like hookworms, typically infect the digestive system in modern animals, sometimes causing severe iron deficiency in their vertebrate hosts. Infections are usually acquired from the environment, often through contaminated food or water, but can also be acquired through insects. The cool thing about finding the signatures of these infections in dinosaur coprolites is that they indicate that dinosaur ecosystems were just as integrated, just as co-evolved, and just as dangerous as in our modern world. Clearly, dinosaurs mixed it up at mealtime, and sometimes even became food themselves. And while we're just beginning to scratch the surface of dinosaur diets, we're sure to learn much more from their teeth, bones, and coprolites as the fossil record continues to develop. Together, all these discoveries continue to revise our views on these incredible creatures.